Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Today I'm going to be doing something rather special, at least something rather special to me. I'm going to be showing you through the journey of my minor amateur restoration of my grandmother's mantle clock here. This mantle clock has been in my life for as long as I can remember. It was sitting on my father's mantle. It was a connection to my grandmother. It was a grandmother that I have never met. Unfortunately, she passed away quite some time before I was born, so I've never really had that connection with her. However, I have had a connection with this clock. It is something that has always interested me. I remember as a kid staring at it and looking at it and just thinking about what an interesting, amazing sort of vintage thing that it was, and looking at the movement inside of it and considering how this thing worked. And it was probably one of the things that has really got me into being interested in both mechanical things and watches. And a while ago, I was discussing it with my dad and I asked him, could I possibly have your mother's clock? I love clocks, I love mechanical clocks, I love watches, and I'd really like to own something that has a connection to his mother, to my grandmother, and he was more than happy to give it to me, which I was really glad because this is the only thing that I have in my household that has a connection to my grandmother. Now this video is going to show you some of the steps that I've done in restoring it myself. I have not wanted to restore it to its former glory. I did not want it to be brand new again. I just want it to be a much better version of itself. Cleaner, classier, displayed a little bit better, and also preserve it for the next 40 or 50 years. So let's flip the camera around now, and I'm going to show you through the steps that I did when I pulled this clock apart and the bits and pieces that I've done. Let's flip it around, let's check it out. So here we have my grandmother's clock, and I just want to show you around it, show you the couple of things that are wrong with it that I'm going to be working on it. First, you're going to see the brass there on both the little inlays here, the feet, and the surround here has got a lot of tarnish on it. So I'm going to do a fair bit of work there. You'll see here that I've actually just given a little bit of a polish just to see what it looks like underneath, and you can see it's going to come up quite nicely, but it's significantly tarnished and it's going to require a lot of work to get that off. So I'm going to try a couple of different processes to do that. Also around here, you're going to see a little bit of damage up on the corner there. Not quite sure how I'm going to fix that. I don't want to overly modify or change it from the original, so I may just end up cleaning that little section up a little bit. The feet also need to be sort of reseated. They're not sitting properly on there. After being cleaned, they're going to need a little bit of work. The dial itself, I don't want to modify too much. When I do take the movement in to get fixed, I'll get them to go throughout it and give it a little bit of a polish, a little bit of a clean, but I don't want it to look brand new again. What I might do, however, is get them to clean up the hands a little bit more significantly so they stand out and look a little bit nicer when it's all done and put together. You'll see up on the top, it's actually looking quite good. In general, all the timber needs a really good scrub and really good clean. And you'll start to see there's a little bit of movement with this little piece of wood here. So that's going to require a little bit of time and energy to clean up and fix. On the back here, as you can see, there's a few bits missing. I'm going to have to build a piece of timber that's going to fit nice and neatly into here. I think there's a bit of timber that's meant to sit across here that holds this piece together, which I'm going to have to make from scratch. And this little piece of timber here that holds onto this little dongy thing, it needs to be replaced completely. It's falling apart. So I'm going to remake another piece of timber to go in there. The movement itself, you can see, is very sort of worn and aged and tarnished. So I'm going to have to take that into my professional watchmaker, clockmaker, and he's going to do a full restoration on that for me. Other than that, I think it just needs a little bit more time and attention and a bit of care. Good cleaning as well. So I'm going to start by taking these feet off, those little bits of brass that are on the front, and I'll give them a clean up and see how we go and see how they come out. So now I'm down just to the timber case of the clock. Should make it a little bit easier to clean and to fix those few bits and pieces. And I've noticed there's a little bit more movement in some of the other wooden panels as well, so I'm going to fix that while I'm there. So I was able to get everything off without causing any damage to the clock, which I'm very happy about, especially these three things here. They're quite delicate, and I was a little bit concerned that I was going to damage them when I took it off. Now these ones here, they look like they've been painted and varnished a few times, but I think they actually might be a brass or some sort of alloy underneath. Not quite sure what they're made of. This one here, I think it's like a pewter or maybe even a lead. So I'm not going to be very gentle with that. I'd hate to break it along these little slim areas, but they need to be cleaned up anyway. Same with the feet. I don't think they're brass, but they certainly need a good clean anyway, so I'll try and get a lot of that off and maybe even refinish them somehow. And the surround to the actual clock dial itself, the hinge is already broken, so I didn't have to force it off. I've just taken the glass out of there. This is actually the piece that goes onto the back of the clock, which then sort of hides the movement. That came with the clock, thankfully that was kept. And the little pendulum from the movement itself. So I'm going to try cleaning these all up with a solution of vinegar and baking soda, or vinegar and flour. I've been looking online, there's a few different ways and methods of doing it. Try and put it into this sort of acidic solution for 45 minutes. Hopefully that gets rid of a lot of the grime that's built up with them, and then I can get in there with a bit of a polish and try and get some of the more leftover bits off the bits and pieces. Being very gentle, obviously, I don't want to damage this. I'd rather it stay looking like this than be damaged. So let's get that cleaning happening and see what happens and see how it comes out after I put it in this solution. So I now have all these little parts soaking in a bucket with a heap of vinegar and some baking soda. So I'm going to leave that for about 45 minutes and then see how it turns out. See if I can scrub away a little bit of the dirt and grime and the bits and pieces that build up over the years. And here we have the clock movement itself with the hands on top. As you can see, it's very, very dirty. It's going to need a good clean up and a good lubrication, a good service. And I'll get my watchmaker to get in there and do that for me. Taking the piece of glass out of that surround, and there's the dial of it. I'm not going to do too much to that, maybe just a very, very light cleaning. I don't want to spoil it or ruin it in any way at all. And there's that piece of timber behind with a little donging thing. You can see it's broken. So I'm going to have to replace that piece of timber, which goes into the underside of the clock itself. So I now had everything apart. I had everything cleaned. I had pulled all the bits and pieces off. I completely cleaned every bit of wood on it, every bit of metal on it, all the bits and pieces, and I had the movement pulled out of the clock. The next step was to take this to my local watchmaker, a watchmaker who I absolutely respect and believe that he'll do a great job, and have this movement completely restored. However, there's a little bit of an issue. He quoted me at least 700 Australian dollars to have this fully restored back to being pristine condition. And right now, 700 Australian dollars to spend on a clock, which realistically I'm probably not actually going to have running, is just a little bit too much money for me to spend. So I can't really justify it. So instead, what I did with the movement outside of the clock, with a lot of time, with a lot of attention, I carefully cleaned it. Now, I haven't cleaned it beyond the point of what I should have. I haven't stripped off all the oil. I've just got rid of all the spider webs, all the bits of bugs, all the dust, all the crud that has probably been building up on this movement for the past sort of 40 or 50 years. And it is now actually looking really, really quite good. But obviously it hasn't been serviced. I'm not going to be running it. And again, $700, I can't justify that right now. It's a bit unfortunate, but I just can't put that amount of money towards this at this point in time. I'm absolutely convinced that at some point in the future, I will invest that money into this, because this clock does mean a lot to me, but just not at this moment. So after I gave it a really, really good thorough clean, a very, very careful clean, I've now mounted it back inside the clock, and I have fixed the few problems that it had with it. One of the big problems with it was some of the mounting screws had been ripped out, they weren't seated properly, and the movement was actually leaning back in on itself. So I've now fixed that problem. So now that I put the movement back inside the clock, I've now seated the hands better, so they're now sitting off the dial of the clock. It is looking much, much nicer. And as you can see, I have cleaned and scrubbed everything a lot. I've really put a lot of effort into making it clean, but I've decided not to repaint anything, try not to refinish anything, because I want it to be as original as possible. The most I have really done is I've just very lightly polished this brass here, and I haven't gone into too much detail with it. I haven't wanted to clean out every single nook and cranny, because I still want it to look like a vintage clock. You'll see on the nails here, I did polish them up so they do stand out a little bit more, but I just want it to be clean. I wanted to still show its age though, but I didn't want to overdo it. I've also glued a few bits and pieces of the wood that were becoming loose. This bit especially was completely loose, so that's now been glued back in place. So finally, what I'm really going to be doing now that I'm not going to have this serviced, I need to fix and replace all the bits that are missing in the back of the clock here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some nice timber that is going to fit in here. There is, if you look closely, there is some sort of runners through here. So I'm going to have to make some timber and then sort of bevel the edges down a little bit. So I've made the first piece of timber. This is actually the little gong part that where the gong hitter, the striker hits. Just like that. And as you can see, I have sort of beveled the edge there where I've cut down the edge so it can slide in there. So as you can see, that fits in there really well. And let's see how it sounds. And there we go, that's probably the first time that's made that noise in a very, very long time. So now I need to make the back plate, and I think there's a little bit that's going to go under here and a little bit that's going to go on there. So I've now made the back plate. As you can see, again, I've got that little beveled edge. I've also attached this little C porthole window here, which sits like that. And I'm assuming that's so you can then reach in and you can get the clock going again. So now that's in place. As you can see, when we move this thing out of the way, you can reach through and you can access the movement. And the next little bit, another little piece, which I'm just going to slide under there. There's some little rails in here, and I think it's basically just to hold that piece of timber in place, even though it is sort of being held by itself by the friction of the timber. Okay, so that next piece is in place. It is now nice and secure, and there's no way that this can now fall out of the back of the clock. And the last little bit is just a piece of timber just to fill this little gap here. And there we have it. We've now filled in and enclosed the back of the clock. Okay, it's not absolutely perfect, but for a clock that is 60, 70 years old, I think that is perfectly good. I may at some point paint this, or perhaps I might oil it or give it another finishing, but realistically, you're not ever going to see the back of it because the clock is going to be turned around. So here we have my grandmother's mantle clock, and I think I'm really happy with the result. Yes, I have not done absolutely everything to it. I have not fixed every little nook and cranny, and I haven't managed to have that movement service because of that price. However, it is much more secure now. It is all put back together. It is stable. There's no timber that's going to be coming apart. It's absolutely clean inside and out, and all the bits that were missing have now been replaced. And I think it does present a lot better now, and it will continue to be looking good and survive for hopefully another 50 or 60 years. So this has been actually quite an interesting journey, pulling this clock apart and doing all the bits and pieces that's required to make it a better version of itself. Now I did this over probably about a 4 or 5 week period. It took a little bit of time. I sort of did it in between doing other things that are in my life and in between doing other videos that I've been recording for this channel. It is a little bit of a shame that I can't justify spending that money having this movement completely restored, but I'm actually okay with it because realistically I'm probably not going to have it running. These older clocks do make quite a loud ticking noise, so even if I had it fully restored, I probably wouldn't have it running every single day. I am glad, however, that I have put the time and energy into it to sort of secure all the bits and pieces that were having problems with it, to clean things that hadn't been cleaned in decades. And with cleaning that movement itself in that very delicate way that I did over the many hours that I took to do so, and it certainly preserves it, I think, for when I do in the future get it fully serviced. And I have to say, I am very happy with the result of this whole journey with the clock. I think it looks great now, and I think there's certainly nothing going to be falling off it now, where when I first had this clock, the feet of it were loose, they were falling off, bits of timber were coming apart and coming off. Now it is nice and secure, and it is going to last decades to come. Now guys, I really do appreciate you taking the time out to watch me playing with my mantle clock here. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I would absolutely love it if you click on that subscribe button. It really does make a big difference to me, and it makes a big difference to my channel, and it gives me that sort of motivation to keep making videos. I enjoy making these videos. I think it's a fun, interesting hobby to do, but obviously it is nice to know that people are enjoying it. And as always, I really do hope to see you in my next video. See you then.